And for that, I'd like to have everybody introduce themselves. My name is Grace. I'm a third-year PhD student at Mount Sinai. And if the panelists could please, if the panelists could please just talk about your educational background and what your degree is in, and how you're involved in medical innovation.
Great. Okay. Hi, my name is Dandan. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of SolveBio. We're a startup, a tech startup based in NoHo here in New York. And what we've done is make genomic reference data a lot easier to access. Right, I'll step back a little bit. For hospitals and for diagnostic labs. So my educational training is mostly in biology. I did my PhD at Weill Cornell here in the city in Robert Klein's lab, and he's actually here now at Mount Sinai. Then after my PhD, I joined SolveBio. I was one of their first employees, and it has been a very good experience since then.
Fantastic. Hi, my name is Jim Lebret. I'm a physician at NYU Medical Center and have dropped down to half-time clinically in order to work on a bunch of different efforts in the digital health space. And I'm still learning about it, and it's still evolving. So just like you, I'm figuring everything out as I go. I just have a quick question for you guys. A show of hands, how many trainees, any clinical trainees do we have in the audience? So medical students, nursing students, raise your hand. Hiya. Okay. How many PhD students? Okay, so a fair amount. And how about faculty? All right, great. How about other? All right, excellent. So just out of curiosity, shout it out. Who are the others? Postdocs. Oh, that's what I meant by grad or PhD student. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I apologize for lumping you together in my mind. So that's great. So just really briefly, my educational background. So I started off MD PhD, did about 3 years of a neuroscience PhD, and then opted back into medicine. And I think we all have pretty circuitous routes, and I'll try to stay as realistic about that as possible on the panel, because I just don't want you to feel like you're alone if you're kind of wandering through life figuring this out as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Joseph Bayer. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Cureatr. We're a kind of care coordination focused company around helping providers manage care transitions, kind of care across the continuum. Just brief background. I did my medical school at Columbia here in the city, and started my residency here at Mount Sinai in psychiatry, and I was actually in a research residency. So spending a fair amount of my time in both clinical and research, but then ultimately started this company during my residency, and one thing led to another, and eventually had to sort of make the decision to do this full time versus be a good doctor, because you can only really do one thing well, and decided to take a leave from finishing the residency, and I've been doing this now for about 2 years full time.
There's sleep. You could always skip sleep.
To be a good doctor, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Great. So my name is Charlene Ngamwajasat, and I'm currently a clinical informaticist at the Primary Care Information Project, which basically we help in terms of public health initiatives, and we work really closely with the Department of Health here in New York City. In terms of my background, I actually got my MD degree from SUNY Downstate. I did my residency in internal medicine at Lenox Hill Hospital. In terms of the digital innovation stuff, I'm a mentor at City College at the Dandan Innovation Center. I've advised startups in the past, and also I write for a publication called AlleyWatch, which is online, and we basically cover entrepreneurship and startups here in New York City.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So we have a bunch of questions from students that we asked before this panel, but we're also going to open this up as soon as these questions are over to the audience. So if you raise your hand, Catherine back there has a microphone, so please get ready, ask questions. We'll open that up as soon as possible. But before that, we just wanted to know, what do you think are some essential criteria to becoming a successful entrepreneur, and how do you feel like your academic training ranks on that list? I don't know, who wants to go first?
Well, the essential criteria, there's many. There's some tangibles, some intangibles. I think one thing that being an entrepreneur you really have to be able to do is just get things done. It's not good enough to give advice or say, oh, we should do this. If you don't do it, it's never going to get done, especially in a small group. And another thing is taking risks. So when you're starting on projects that you're not sure it's going to work out, trying to take on clients that you're not sure that they will come on. It's just a lot of things that you have to go out of your comfort zone every day and be able to do that. And unfortunately, I think the academic training has not been particularly good for that, forcing you to go outside your comfort zone to take risks on a day-to-day basis. And even sometimes when it comes to getting things done, in academia, it's very easy to you want to get it perfect, but it's better to have it mostly good in 2 weeks rather than perfect in 6 months. So that's I think that's some essential criteria.
Thank you. Charlene, because you're on the end, so you don't want to be last every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I concur with Dandan in terms of the points that she elaborated on in terms of being a risk taker. Because I think that in academics, we go to class, we take these tests, you want to not fail the test, basically, so you can get on to the next step in your education. And I think what happens in entrepreneurship is that you really have to try different things out. If you're looking at a target market and it turns out in your research or as you put your product or service or technology out there and you find that, well, it's a different population that actually have become the first adapters for your particular technology. So I think it's the ability to be creative, to be open-minded, the ability to pivot and sort of, if A doesn't work, then maybe B will work. I think you also have to be a planner because you're going to have to make sure that you're able to get the right people involved. You're going to have to be able to plan out maybe 3 to 6 months what you're going to do. And also, I think a lot about what it means to actually be an entrepreneur. A lot of times when we think about entrepreneurs, we're like, it's about someone who's going to start a business of any sorts. I have a more expansive view of entrepreneurship, and I think it's that somebody that sees a problem in the world and is motivated and willing and takes actions towards fixing that problem.
Yeah, I agree with everybody everything that each of the panelists has said so far. If just looking back on medical school and residency, the value there. Well, if you're going to do something in healthcare, of course, having the clinical credibility makes a difference. Entrepreneurship aside, I think there are some qualities that you gain or some, sort of things about those two experiences that were valuable to me in medical school. Was sort of in a position to have a lot of very good mentors and sort of advisors and folks who still to this day are advisors and mentors in this stage of my career. So I think that's something that a great medical school like at Sinai or any of the leading academic medical centers are good for is, talking to subject matter experts. The nice thing about residency, you learn how to work really hard and be just, work long hours and grind through things that you don't necessarily love for the parts of the residency experience that you do like, which is managing patients. And, when you're an entrepreneur, it's like 90% of the time the 90% are the things that you don't read about in AlleyWatch or in TechCrunch, and that's the challenging, solving problems, the things you don't love doing but you have to do, and it's the 5 to 10% of the time that keeps you going. So I think that's also something that listen, not 90% of my residency was miserable, but not you're doing a lot of charting and you're doing a lot of compliance stuff that's not necessarily taking care of patients. So I think those two pieces of it were important. Then there's the stuff I don't think you learn in residency or medical school, which are I think just, which I don't know if you can learn at all, which are just, you have to be a persistent person, you have to be, a little bit delusional, aka be able to take risks and convince yourself that something's lower risk than it actually is. And then I think, there's a sales aspect of being an entrepreneur. It's selling your vision, selling to investors, to customers, and getting people to believe in you. And that's not really something that you necessarily learn in school. Maybe in the research side of things, you do some more of that. But in, pure clinical training and medical school, that's not really a focus.
Yeah. There's the overt curriculum and the hidden curriculum when you're in school, and I think some of these things that we've been hearing, right? We don't learn a lot of these things. I agree with that, but at the same time, take some comfort in knowing that you're learning a lot on the wards, in the lab, how to deal with uncertainty, how to stick with something, right? Your project, the assay isn't working for the 5th month in a row, and you're still trying to find new ways to get around that. I think these things, if one of the things you're thinking of doing is moving into the entrepreneurial realm, these lessons will serve you well, and you'll be a quick study, and you won't have to learn it completely from scratch. But I really agree with what's been said. The grit and determination, being, you said, a little delusional, there is that element, and I've had the privilege to learn from 3 excellent CEOs that I've been advising in the digital health realm, and these are hard-won lessons. Dandan, it sounds like you had some hard-won lessons as well.
Perhaps.
I think that's a rite of passage that you really have to go to get to where you want to be.
So right after this last question, we'll open it up, and it looks like Brett in the red tie has a microphone, and again, Catherine on the other side. So if you want to raise your hand after this, we'll open the questions up to you. But the last question that we had as students was, it seems like you guys all have reasonably traditional education. Did you have any business or entrepreneurship experience? Because it seems like Sinai right now is really opening up to providing internships at IBM and Google X. Did you have these opportunities, and how influential were these in your career trajectory? Start with you, because you just...
Sure. Okay. So the short answer is no, that these weren't available, and I think that's extraordinarily exciting to hear what's being done here. At the same time, I liked, Charlene, I liked your definition of an entrepreneur, sort of really getting out there and trying to solve a problem. The way, my background is actually as an English major in undergrad, and I did a lot of writing, which I still maintain is the most difficult thing out there, probably besides being a CEO of a startup. It teaches you how to think, it teaches you to reason, and that was my background, and I find it incredibly translatable to the creative act of making a company and really business strategy. When it comes to telling that story, making that story, and making it make sense to you and to others, I think that's incredibly helpful. So there are sort of non-traditional routes that are really beneficial. So take stock of your experiences. They all count.
Charlene?
Yeah, so my answer is no as well. And this was back maybe how many years? Oh, several years. Basically, in terms of entrepreneurship, I've actually gotten entrepreneurship experience just outside of med school and outside of training, because my parents and my family were entrepreneurs. We had a restaurant, my aunt had a beauty parlor and things like that. But I think that what's changed in terms of the environment here, or even the fact that we're all sitting in this room at Sinai talking about entrepreneurship, is that I think people are starting to recognize that it is a viable path after whatever training you've had. I think a couple of years ago, I would walk into a room and say, like, I'm a doctor, I'm interested in technology, and people were like, whoa, that's a very anomalous type of situation. But I think what's happening now is the realization that we're moving into this 21st century of medicine where we have technical infrastructure, and we're thinking about new ways of delivering care to people and improving health. And I think that because of the openness of the environment, even the government who I work with, we're starting to become more open-minded in terms of different pathways to get to certain points. And I think what's important now as well is seeing pathways out of traditional healthcare into something like, for instance, there are fellowships in clinical informatics now versus sort of my path, which has been more doing a lot of the innovation work, teaching myself, and just being intellectually curious, and then leveraging that in my experience with technology and my clinical background to become a clinical informaticist now. And so I think that sitting in your shoes today as grad students, PhDs, et cetera, there are more pathways, and I would encourage you to take advantage of that, or at the very least, talk to people at conferences and things like this and dip your toe in. You don't have to dive right in, but see if you're really interested and this is something that you really want to do. And I think that Sinai actually, with all of the programs that are being developed, has a really good support system and infrastructure for you to do that within its system.
Joe?
Yeah, and I haven't had any formal business training. I think there are pluses and minuses to that, right? I mean, just because you go to business school doesn't mean you're going to be an entrepreneur, and in some ways it maybe makes you less risk averse. I mean, you really depends on the person. I mean, for me, the best way I've learned sort of how to do this, again, there's really been two very clear things. One is finding good mentors. So when I was an undergrad, was working in a lab at Stanford with the chairman of psychiatry. He started a biotech company. I was, the 7th employee, and I ended up, working with those guys for almost 7 years. And so along the way, I had different roles in the company, started in research, got more involved in other aspects. So, a lot of that was very valuable on the job learning. And then, again, just trying things, failing, trying them again, whether it's building an investor presentation and presenting that, doing financial project, whatever, all those skills that, at the end of the day, the best way to learn that stuff from an entrepreneur perspective in a smaller company is to just get out there and do it. Now, if you're talking about, I want to be the CFO of, a Fortune 500 company or a public company, that's a very hard set of skills and things that you definitely need to learn, whether from somebody else or in school, around reporting and around, different things there. But if your goal is to start something, a lot of that stuff you can learn on the job, and then the last piece is you hire people or you find co-founders or partners in areas where you're, again, you can only be really good at one, maybe two things in an organization, even in a smaller company. And so that's why you have co-founders, you have early team members you bring on to fill the gaps.
Dandan?
Yeah, so I would say for me it's been also pretty similar. I don't have any formal training in entrepreneurship. I wasn't involved before. I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I was familiar with the idea, but I think we all are. In terms of, a lot of it is on-the-job training. Like within the first 6 months of after I finished my PhD and started working at SolveBio, I was writing press releases, I was writing code. You meet with clients, have some disastrous client meetings, meet with investors, have some good client meetings too. And you do everything, every part of the business, and you can only learn it from experience. There's really no other way. And then on the idea of internships for Sinai students, I think that's fantastic. I really wish when I was in grad school that existed. And even now we have some grad students and postdocs that are interested in interning for us, but once they ask their PI invariably says no, because it's easy for their PI to say no. So I think that's something that has to be what the graduate program and the institution has to really enforce, like these sorts of outside opportunities.
Thank you. So with that, we'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience. If you raise your hand, they'll get mics to you. Come on, guys, questions.
In the
Is it
meantime, there's a question, but as the mic gets to you, there's a question right here. Some of this boils down to credibility and what do we believe deserves credibility. And often in academia, an MD or PhD is sort of a mental shortcut to credibility, but there are other ways of attaining credibility, and as we're hearing, one of those is by doing, and it can be a little threatening to our worldview sometimes, but it's a very viable avenue.
Hi, thank you again for your time and for speaking with us. I'm a first-year medical student, and I was wondering, I know one of you mentioned that you still see patients, but in terms of wearing the entrepreneur hat and wearing the physician or the scientist hat, does the work that you do in entrepreneurship ever encroach on your seeing patients and your energy that is devoted to being in the clinic?
So I still see patients. Do you still see patients?
Not really. No,
Just passing on the subway?
Just my employees. No.
So I still see patients, and the answer is pretty complex. So I think on a positive note, I really feel like my clinical practice benefits from the immense amount of learning that I have to do in the realm of digital health. I can bring things back that I wouldn't otherwise have known. On the darker side, absolutely, there's only so much bandwidth that we all have, and it is very hard to sometimes switch gears between the clinical and the entrepreneurial, and to go back and forth. Luckily, I can kind of cluster my time, but it's very difficult, and mostly what I'm involved with is advising, but in the startup that I did found, it is very difficult to move back and forth. But that said, it's often very synergistic in some ways too. So there's not really a simple answer on that one. It
depends on the role too, and if you're a clinical person or a medical director or whatnot in a company, of which there are a lot, often those folks will see patients. There's a surgeon I was talking to who started in ACO and is running that full time, but still does volunteer work. There's a lot of ways you can still, and I think it is good to keep a toe in the clinical side of things, but ultimately, you do have to, as the company grows or as an organization grows, you just have to decide what you want to really focus the bulk of your energy on, and in some scenarios that means only one thing or the other.
So my advice would be to do what makes you happy. If you're really interested and you're leaning more towards the technology, go there. If you're leaning more towards the business, go there. I think that there's a value to having a scientific or a medical background, especially in this environment of innovation in the scientific, biological, medical world, because we're able to a certain extent help to shape policies, help to shape the technologies. Because I think it's interesting, for a time there are some technologies that are created with no clinical input whatsoever, and so you get this package of technology that really isn't suited well to patients or suited well to providers in terms of their workflow. I also, I think it's important to dip a toe into the clinical world so that you always are able to see what's happening in real time on the ground. And that's something that I do as well. I also do site visits to meet with other providers in New York City just to see what's happening outside of my little zone or little zip code. So I think it's possible to be able to have, I think a lot of the fellowships are set up, it's 75% of the time is sort of technical population health. And then there's a 25% mandated clinical time where you actually see patients in the clinic. So you can do both, but I agree that once you reach a certain level, if say you're in a startup and your company has 10, 12, 15 employees, it's going to be very hard to do both at the same time. And also you have to consider conflicts of interest as well. So sometimes it's you can't have a company and also work for an institution because of that conflict.
Any other questions?
Hi, thank you to all of the panelists so far for your insights. I think it's really valuable. So my background is a little bit different, I think, than most people here. I'm an entrepreneur currently, and I'm pre-med, and I'm planning on going back to medical school. And just from my limited perspective, I found that, being pre-med, and I'm sure in medical school, it's so time-consuming, and the curriculum can be very rigid. And I'm just wondering, from your experiences, I think opportunities like what Sinai has to offer are rarer in a lot of medical schools. And my question is if you have any advice on how to make the most of your medical school experience and maybe your clinical training to still set you up for a good career in digital health without sacrificing anything that you would be gaining from your training, if that makes sense. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, I mean,
Go for it.
I mean, listen, I think it's going to vary by person, right? I mean, you have to be very clear on what you want to get out of medical school, first of all, which, and if it's you want to, get a residency in neurosurgery in the top program in the country, you probably are going to have to spend a lot of time on that. Whereas if you want to go into internal medicine, maybe do an intern year in internal medicine and somewhere in New York City, you got to set your sights on, that's where you're setting your sights. You can sort of think through, how do I balance, how much time I need to study to hit that goal versus going and doing an internship or doing research. So I think, some of it is going to just be being very clear on your goals. And I think a lot of medical schools are more flexible about that right now, right? Whereas traditionally, even when I was in medical school at that other place across the park, it was pretty much, if you're going to be doing anything other than clinical, you should be trying to get a publication. That's still. So I think, kind of given the fact that places like Sinai are creating new opportunities, your dean, I'm sure, sees value if in that, and that you can kind of tie that back to whatever your personal goals are. You can definitely make that time. I mean, when I was in medical school, I found time to do things, and it was everything from watching certain lectures on podcasts instead of going in. So I'm sure everybody here has figured out some of those loopholes, and a lot of that is just saying, instead of being the person who comes into class every day to take the best possible notes, I'm going to focus on, using my time a little bit differently. And so I think that's really the personal part of it.
Either of you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, your story of being an entrepreneur and going into medical school, because I think actually that's going to be really helpful, because I love it when we have people that come from different backgrounds because our patients come from a wide swath of places. So it would make sense that we have physicians that also come from a wide swath of places. And I think that having sort of that entrepreneurial thinking of like iterations, of making things better, actually would be helpful for the healthcare system itself. In terms of a timing situation, yes, as somebody that has worked those 24-hour calls, which by the way are no longer taking place, it's really hard. There are things like buying 30 days worth of clothes. You don't have to do laundry, things like that. Not watching as much Real Housewives, things like that. But basically, I think there are ways of doing it. I think that if you wanted to learn, there are a lot of free online courses. Like, for example, the Office of the National Coordinator for IT has this online MOOC, this massive open online course where you can learn about health information technology on your own time. And that's like an hour or half an hour if you speed through some of the slides. Also, I think that in some medical schools now, they're encouraging, like when I was in residency, I did a quality improvement project related to tracking A1Cs because, it was 3 o'clock in the morning and, I look at this lab order and it says like, oh, we need to stick this patient to get an A1C, which is generally something that we don't really do. And it starts to stimulate ideas of like, how can I do things better? Or like one of the projects I've always thought about was how to redesign a hospital supply closet to make it less disorganized or to standardize the way things are, and maybe color code things. So I think you could do sort of entrepreneurial things as well. And I think it's really important, though, to have faculty that supports that. And I think that that's something that I'm starting to see more and more of. Or like maybe petition for a digital health innovation externship or an elective where, just like you would be able to take a GI elective, which I've taken, so all the love in the world for GI. But I wish that was something that if you chose to go into digital innovation or were even curious about it, that you would get credit for that in school. So petition.
Yeah. So I think it's important to remember the currency of the two different cultures that you're talking about. One is innovation and entrepreneurship, which is getting stuff done, and the other is academic medicine, which is publishing papers or you're getting degrees. And when trying to do both, you can kind of be pulling yourself in two directions at once. I mean, just thinking about it, if you were in medical school right now, I think there's a reason that we have many more PhDs and postdocs here than we do clinicians, right? They're all on the wards right now. So there's definitely a limit to how many places you can be at one time. So just take that into account as you make your decisions. And sometimes we don't always know why we're making decisions, right? I mean, let's be honest, you know, we get attracted to certain things, and but try to be mindful of that. Try to figure out what your drive is to want to do certain things, and parse it out a little bit. And don't get upset with yourself if you don't immediately know on day one why you want to do things. You'll find out.
Thank you. We have a question over there. Catherine?
Okay, this is a totally different topic, but I'm just wondering, what would you advise first-time entrepreneurs about seeking funding for their startups? What to do and what not to do?
So I hope you don't mind sitting here for another 27 hours while we discuss that.
Let's do the quick version.
Yeah.
Yes.
You going?
I'll let the main entrepreneurs take this one.
You know, I think there's obviously a lot of options today. You know, there's really traditional kind of venture investment, and then there is now this whole kind of world of accelerators, and then there is, you know, raising friends and family, kind of the old-fashioned way. Yeah, and, you know, crowdfunding increasingly in the product realm. You know, I mean, I think it comes down to, I mean, again, you know, it's interesting in the whole context of this discussion, right? If you're truly out there asking people to write a check for you, you know, this idea of balancing, you know, being a doctor with an entrepreneur, all that kind of typically goes out the window in the sense that, you know, you got to go out there and basically put your sales hat on. You're, you know, selling a vision or on a PowerPoint. Most of the time, people don't have customers yet. They don't have a product built yet when they're getting that first kind of check, if you will. And that is you know, that is where the subject matter expertise and credibility of having an MD or a PhD definitely helps, assuming you're trying to do something in a relevant area. But ultimately, you know, I mean, I think the big thing is again, you gotta pick one thing and really, you know, kind of be laser focused on that, and then be able to sell it to somebody. So I mean, I think the best experience, you know, you can get as a first time entrepreneur is, you know, it kind of goes back to what I said before. I mean, understanding the idea of selling an idea or selling something to someone and getting somebody to believe in it. It's really important. So if you've had that experience in the lab for raising grant funding, or if you've had that experience in any other part of the world, you know, that translates back. And then other than that, you know, it's sort of just deciding what route you want to go down between that accelerator route, the friends and family route, the kind of more traditional venture route. But there's no secret answer to that. I mean, that's the reality. Like you had said, that's a longer discussion.
Dan, did you have anything to?
Yeah, there's many ways, many good ways, many bad ways. The first, though, no matter what way you go about it, you really got to make sure that the basis of what you're doing is good, meaning you have a really good co-founder or somebody that you trust that you're working with. And then in terms of like the type of funding that you want to get, it kind of depends on your idea in a sense, and where you're starting the company from. So accelerators are really big, especially in New York City right now. There is government funding for small businesses, the SBIR grants. That's if you're starting a company coming out of a university, for example, those are good sources of funding. If you got a big idea that you think will really transform the world, and you can really like pitch that and sell that, going the VC route is definitely, they want 100,000x returns. So they'll definitely give a bit of seed money for a big idea. And if you have already a viable business model in your mind, maybe you've like made a bit of a product demo already, you can also bootstrap it. So you can, and that's not a terrible idea in like some realms, just making money and then seeing where the product takes you from there. Lots of different ways.
Yeah, and I would add, you really want to do your homework in terms of funding. Like there's this great book by Brad Feld, Bradfeld, and he's written a couple of books. One of them is about knowing venture financing better than your lawyer does. So I think it's really important to really understand, if you're going to go the venture route, the structure of venture funding, learning about equity, learning about debt rounds and things like that. I think also if you're going to go the venture round, really doing your homework on the venture capitalists and the types of fields of markets that they actually invest in, because it wouldn't make sense if you were doing hardware to go to a venture capitalist that invests more in non-hardware based technologies. I also think it's important to really go for some of the lower hanging fruit in terms of things that you may not necessarily have to pay back, like some contests or grants. The Economic Development Corporation of New York City tends to have a lot of competitions. Health 2.0 has competitions. There's the Health Data Consortium. There are different contests that are sponsored by a lot of pure technology companies that are now really interested in healthcare, and so they also sponsor a lot of competitions. And I think even the New York Public Library had a couple of small business competitions. And I think those are also a great sort of training ground as well. So you practice getting up in front of people and speaking and being able to explain your company in about a minute or 2 minutes, back of the envelope kind of way. And so I think it's about practice, it's about doing your research, it's about understanding business structure, and I think it's also about talking to different people who have expertise in that area. And don't be afraid to ask, because the worst thing somebody could say is like nothing, not even getting a response, right? Versus saying yes or no to your request. And I think you'll find that most people will say yes if you are asking for advice.
And you should definitely stay for the next session. We're actually holding a pitch competition after this, so that will be interesting to see venture capital's positions and other entrepreneurs. Next question, go for it. Can you project?
I just want everybody to know I can project without this. I'm actually a full-time, I'm actually a physician, couple of years out of residency now. And I have a bit of a unique situation because I'm technically a full-time employee, but I only work a third of the year because I work at night. And so I basically, just that, I do a week and then I'm off 2 weeks. And I'm looking for some opportunities for startups that could utilize someone like me to consult on the medical component of the business. And I was wondering what kind of avenues you think I can approach to, particularly to meet people that would be able to sort of utilize that skill set. It's been my experience that some other ventures I've been a part of with other physicians, I've found a lot of what Dr. Mayer was saying, that they're not really they can only do one thing really, unless they have a situation where they're not really working that much like me. And I found them to be overly risk averse, and they don't have a lot of that component of, they want to study for a test and get 100 on it. They don't want to absorb like uncertain moments. So I wanted to see what would your recommendation be for someone like me, because I'm not really, I'm kind of too far in, I would say, into my career to completely drop it. Yet at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of me that would drop it if there was something reasonable.
So can you guys kind of speak to how best to figure out, to find different avenues to get involved in entrepreneurship and find jobs there people who have our type of degrees really can flourish?
Yeah, so you're doing it right now. By asking that question, by being here, you're doing it right now, and that's how it mainly works. There's not, a website. Well, there are some that to a varying extent, but it's really by reaching out to your community, knocking on doors. there's a lot of technical health startups out there that don't know that they need clinical advice. So it is your job to find them and to frame it and pitch them and say, here, this is what I have to offer. This is what I know. Take a look at yourself. Think about what values you can bring, and reach out to your community. I think even if you could only talk to the people in this room, I think you would find those opportunities pretty quickly, especially in New York. There's always something going on. You look at Gary's Guide, there's always something health going on each week. It's a really good resource for sort of everything in tech that's going on each week, but there's always something in health. And just go there, introduce yourself to the person next to you, do the same today, and you'll find those opportunities will soon be more than you can handle.
Yeah, I concur. And I can also say Gary's Guide is awesome because it covers not just healthcare, but there are design events to go to. There's meetup.com where you can meet other healthcare entrepreneurs who actually are looking for people like you. Like, it may be a technical person, but they have no clinical experience. But because healthcare is such a hot investment area, or is because there's something relating to healthcare that they've always been interested in, that they're looking for a clinical person. And I agree, pitching yourself is also a way of doing it, because you're able to sort of curate those sort of initiatives or companies, startups, et cetera, that you actually want to be a part of. And I also think that just going to different conferences is also really important, because, again, you can sit next to somebody that's actually looking for somebody like you. And I also think that they're a great way of looking at what people are talking about in terms of trends in digital health, or in sort of the scientific, there's precision medicine. A lot of the topics that were being talked about this morning are a lot of the things that are sort of, it's either foundational in terms of what the next 5 to 10 years of healthcare will be like, or finding something that really interests you because you read about it in a magazine, or say all of a sudden you're interested in nanotechnology, finding people that are specialists in that area and just asking them out to coffee. I think there was this book about this girl, and I think she went on a couple of 100 coffee dates, and it was a way of just meeting different people and finding out what they specifically do, because that will give you a good idea whether or not that particular line of healthcare, whatever that other person is involved in, is something that you would like to be involved in.
Yeah, I would say that on the pitching yourself topic, really do your homework and find companies that you are interested in, that you know that you can offer something to, and then pitch yourself. We get emails with attached is my CV, and that's not very helpful. And even it's like, here's a short list of my accomplishments and all these things I've done. But it's still putting the impetus on us to try and figure out a role for you. If you can come in saying, like, I can do this project for you, or like, I have this idea, just pitch them with something that you can do and you can start on day one, so they don't have to think of something to offer you instead.
I think I agree with everything. Again, I think it just comes down to being clear on what you want, right? If you're looking to get paid as a consultant on kind of something clinical or specific, then you're probably not going to get the earlier stage companies who don't have a lot of cash, who don't have a lot of people, is interest, but you might get something that's not a startup, but a company willing to hire someone for that role. If it's you want to get exposure to the startup world, you're willing to do it for whatever it takes from a financial perspective, and you think that startup is a startup you can particularly add value, you got to go there, articulate, this is what I'm willing to do, this is where I think I can help, and then it's a numbers game. Reach out to 20, don't reach out to 2, because it's a lot of it is just right time, right place.
I also would like to add that and this goes for funding as well, to your question. It's also really important to get good legal advice, especially if you're working for a particular institution, because you want to hammer out what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. And also, sometimes people print things off of the internet, like legal documents, and you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're signing and are legally bound to uphold is something that you are conscious of and can live with. And also, like, the other consideration is finances as well. Like, you're already out of school, but for a lot of people here who are still in school and racking up those loan bills, you want to make sure that, you take into account loan repayment. And, I think that there are some income-based repayment plans, et cetera, if you really go deep into the entrepreneurial route, because you want to set yourself up for the future as well and make sure that you have a financial plan.
Other questions? Is there a way to pass the mic?
I can project my voice.
Cool, that works too.
So we talked about funding and we talked about getting consultancies, but how did you guys as entrepreneurs find your first customers? And how did you go talk about that experience? Because I'm trying to get my first customer and it's frustrating.
A lot of it is connection. So we're a bit lucky in a regard. SolveBio is backed by some VCs are prominent in the tech scene. So those VCs are the ones that set us up with a lot of our customers, with get those first meetings. Because it's not just like meeting with a company, you have to meet with the right person within the company. It depends on also what you're trying to sell. We're more of an enterprise-to-enterprise sort of sales, so it's quite important for us to be meeting the right person at the organization we're trying to sell to. And sometimes it's just, you never know, really. Sometimes it's word of mouth, sometimes it's a message board. So one of our earlier customers came from BioStars.
I mean, I was a resident here. I went and knocked on the door of the chairman of medicine, and said, I built this. Can we try it? So I mean, I think that is an advantage you have if you're a trainee in a place like Sinai, where you can find people who are open and interested in what you're doing. And if you're persistent, that conversation led me to another, probably led me to 20 others, and a year later or so, Sinai was we did a pilot. Sinai became our first customer. So I think, that is something that you guys have maybe access to, or the ability to do that somebody starting a company outside of an organization like this wouldn't necessarily have. So, that is one route as well that is maybe a non-traditional.
Jim?
Yeah, I think it really depends if you're B2B or B2C. It's business to business, or if you're looking for consumers, it's going to be different routes, right? If you're consumers, you could think of things, social media, more guerrilla tactics. If it's B2B, you're going to be looking for introductions. One thing I will say, I think I might be getting off the topic for a second, but just some really important things. If I realize there are some of these terms being thrown around. If you don't understand them, just Google them, and once you Google them, you'll find that there's going to be a lot more terms popping up too. Highly recommend just sitting down with a business glossary for the weekend and getting comfortable with it, and grab a glass of wine. This is, it's you're all very smart and have achieved a lot. It'll be pretty quick for you, because you don't really get anywhere in a lot of this without knowing the vernacular. That's one thing. And then another thing, besides the language, I think, is the culture and the behavior. As we were hearing, there's some very different practices in sort of the business and tech realm than in the hospital. As we heard, being okay with failure, and so on. And I think I'll give you two more quick resources that I've found invaluable in this arena. Is one, learning how to negotiate. Everything is a negotiation, and the sooner you realize that, the better. And my starting point was on Coursera with the University of Michigan's negotiations course. Incredibly valuable. It's only about 5 hours long. Just Google Coursera negotiations course, and I'll stick with that. That and the glossary. I think that'll get you up to speed a lot more quickly, and in what can be a pretty confusing realm.
You can go. Okay, so in terms of customers, it does depend on who you're looking at, enterprise versus consumers. And I think it's important in either way to try to get yourself an external champion. If it's a consumer, like, why does this person love my product? Or to have this person say, like, I love this product for these reasons. I also think it's important in terms of who you're selling to, like, to really try to understand all of the different factors that might be involved in whatever it is that related to your product. So if it's a device, how easy is it used as a device? Where would you use it? How much is it? Because there's a lot of practical elements surrounding a particular customer. If it's sort of more enterprise, it also depends on what kind of enterprise customer you're really looking at. A lot of the times you're looking at hospital systems, and it's a very complex structure, and you need to do your homework based on that. In terms of my role sort of into consultancy and just getting into innovation, one of the things that I did was I pretty much tried to read every single thing related to digital health, technologies, just so that so people would meet with me, and it's like, I'm not just coming to you to just ask you a whole bunch of questions. I would go into meetings incredibly prepared. Like, I would know every startup that was just funded in the last 6 months or so. So I think becoming an expert in whatever section of digital medicine is really important as well, so that people are like, this is not just a hobby, this is something that I really, really want to do. And I think the writing thing for me helped as well, because my healthcare background is so traditional that I think most people would be surprised, that I was so interested in technology. But because I had written so much about my interest and also about the different trends and different things that were coming out of digital medicine, people realized that this is something that I'm truly passionate about.
Yeah, so it depends on what you're selling, but it might be easier to sell to someone like yourself. So when we got started, we definitely had the most success with other startups because they were willing to take a risk on us. So if other startups that follow developers, we're a startup full of developers, it was very easy to talk to. So it's easier to sell to someone who gets what you're doing and what you're trying to do.
Okay, and I think we have time for one last question.
So there's been a lot of postdocs and PhDs in the room, but any questions from you guys?
I'm a PhD student.
All right.
All right.
So what is your advice for bringing in outside expertise, especially when you're just starting out, you have no money, you can't offer any equity, or the equity is not worth a lot? Say you need an engineer or a programmer, something like that. What is your advice?
In my opinion, that's a co-founder.
Yeah.
That's someone who's absolutely integral to what you're trying to build. I mean, unless it's just a website or an outward-facing marketing thing, then you can contract it out. But it sounds like you need someone you trust that you're going to work with for a very, very long time and who's going to have a significant equity stake in the company.
And then I'll just ask another quick question. So what do all good entrepreneurs have in common?
They ask multiple questions at conferences.
Luck.
That's not what anyone wants to hear.
I mean, I think just the point is there's nothing, every company is different, every startup experience is different. I think, the reality is there's no formula to be a good entrepreneur. That's why you can't learn it in school. That's why not everybody becomes one. But, I think there are clearly, if you talk to 100 early employees about the founders of their companies, they're definitely the things we talked about earlier, persistence, taking risk, probably, they drive you crazy sometimes because, they're talking about a future state. I mean, those are kind of the things that I think there's definitely some truth to that, but, it's definitely not, there's still a lot more magic than, it's not like doing a surgery where, you memorize the 15 steps and you can do it. You do it a couple hundred times and then you can do it. But it's really just, there's a lot of luck to.
I think in terms of attributes, it's a lot of what he has just mentioned, as well as some of the things that we talked about at the beginning of this discussion. But I think it's also interesting, too. I think that entrepreneurship is such an individual kind of journey. And also when you're trying to, what we call like disrupt the market or do something that is just exponentially different, like why even want to be like other people? Why not be your own unique self and have your own unique solution? Because you always want to, think differently, like the Steve Jobsian kind of thing.
Anything to add?
I think we're good.
One last short question? No? Okay, so then I'd really like to end the panel with, can you give me your one sentence, again, the short version, not the 27-hour long lecture, of what your working definition of entrepreneur is? Before you mentioned getting out there and solving problems, but how do you define yourselves as entrepreneurs?
Well, I think an entrepreneur is someone who brings value into the world by whichever way possible.
Yeah, I think at its heart, bringing something new into the world in a creative manner. That's my take.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just being able to recognize a problem or an opportunity and convince yourself that you're the one who can solve that or figure out how to, turn it into a living, kind of breathing product or company.
This is like our pitch line, basically,
Yeah.
right? So for me, it's being happy, being creative, and being productive.
Okay. And any last pieces of advice for all of us out in the audience trying to be entrepreneurs?
Do what you love. I think we didn't talk enough about passion. Really find the thing that makes you tick, that makes you get up in the morning. I was speaking to one of our advisors recently, and he said, everything becomes drudgery. What kind of drudgery do you want to do? And we all have that. Even though it sounds kind of weird, we all have that. There is something that will wake you up, whether it is exploration, whether it is advocacy, whether it is really just getting out there and sort of being popular. Whatever drives you, use that.
Yeah, you're going to definitely need that to get through the hard times, because even though, yes, we have some really successful entrepreneurs, and it's true in a lot of the tech press, there are a lot of people that, they just got $1 billion and things like that. It's like, it's getting up in the morning and saying, like, this is what I want to do. This is what makes me happy. It's okay that I'm the janitor, or the caterer, or the head of the company. It's like, you really need that in order for you to kind of get through this gauntlet of entrepreneurship. But on the way there, it is about the journey, because you will be able to acquire knowledge and experiences that you may not have been able to do in the past had you not taken this route. And then having worked, in the bedside and critical care units and talking to patients that are terminally ill or things like that, one of the things that has always stuck with me is people always say, I regret that I never traveled. I regret that I've never done X, Y, and Z. And so, it's about living the life that you want to live and trying the things that you would really like to accomplish and do.
Yeah, so I would say work with people that you really, really admire. So you work with a really good team. Everyone should complement each other really well. And it's almost impossible, if you want to be an entrepreneur, to work alone in a very efficient way. So just work with a group of people who are all great at what they do and be inspired by them and work together to build something wonderful and useful.
Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your advice. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.